All right, so again, this is the third part of the three-part series covering mentorship in the AA way of living. Usually we do an opening, we as Tom had mentioned, we'll do some opening remarks in the very beginning. And one of those sections that we go over is for the first edition, where the last sentence we cover says that our way of living has its advantages for all. So while we go through this process to become recovered, that's a one-off deal. According to the book, we do that once. To get through step 9, midway through step 9, you will have recovered by then. There should be no reason to have to go back to do any of it again, because the AA way of living is going to be covered in steps 10, 11, and 12. And that's what we're going to cover today. Now, while last week we covered steps 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, that was a lot. This week, we're just covering 10, 11, and 12. But I don't know if we're going to have time to do it. I may end up having to chop some stuff out because there's so much in there. Like steps 10 and 11, it is covered on page 84 to 88. Not a lot of material there, but really needs to be memorized because that is the biggest part of this communication that we're trying to get with God. But the second piece that has to do with mentorship, which is part of our way of life, that's covered in chapter 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 5 chapters of 12. So there's a lot of material we're going to be covering. So where we're at now, again, we've had the spiritual kit of tools, as they say on page 25, laid at our feet when we're sick. We've obviously picked them up, and then we put them into practice, just as Bill did, and we wound up recovering. What is the spiritual kit of tools anyways? They talk about that in several places in the book. What is the spiritual kit of tools that we were given? Right here. This book. First portion of the book. It's how I got well. Laid at my feet. Got well, and so we've had our spiritual experience. We're into step 9, had our spiritual experience. Now what we're to do is to start living the AA way of life, and we're going to be doing that as we're doing step 9. It's interesting because steps 1 through, they're listed in order. Steps 1 through 9, they're to be worked in order, according to the book, as we followed along. But if you go to page 84, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but on page 84, if you go down second paragraph, about midway down the page, we're going to start here with this step 10. It says, this thought brings us to step 10, which suggests that we're going to continue to take personal inventory. So taking personal inventory is what? Step 4, taking inventory, right? And it says, and we're going to continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. Well, that would be step 9. We're going to find it's everything in between steps 4 and 9. Well, guess what? You'll never have to go back through and do a 4 through 9 if you're doing it every day, right? There'll be no reason to go back. And it says we vigorously commence this way of living. So this is where we start this new way of living. And then here's the word that makes the difference. As. We're going to commence this way of living as we clean up the past. That means we're not done with step 9. If you all know about the promises on the previous page, it says, we'll be amazed before we're halfway through, okay? And what they start talking about is how we feel and all. Well, that in context is step 9. Halfway through, we're going to be amazed. Halfway through is when we recover. Halfway through, as we're cleaning up the past, we're going to start step 10. And we're also going to start step 11. And we're also going to start step 12. That is the AA way of life. It doesn't happen after you're done making amends. Shoot, we've learned that it could take years to make all of our amends, right? So we're going to do that as we clean up the past. So as we enter the world of the Spirit, our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness, and this is no overnight matter. So how many months do we do this for? It should continue for, our lifetime way of living, okay? So that tells us that we're on a new footing here. So what I want to go back to is something that we talked about last week and with the spiritual experience. I said, what we're looking to do is really our goal here is to put that step 3 where we're making a decision to do something where we can actually do it. And the decision is to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. But what we found, the reason we have to do steps 4 through 9 is we have all these blocks based on from the selfishness, resentment. So everything is subcategories of selfishness. Actually, that's the root problem. The selfishness blocks God. That's the problem. So we can know we've learned before that there's many of us, and even in the book that turn to religion to solve their problem and are very well versed, but still could not recover. Still could not. They know these things very well, these philosophies as well, but they can't put it into practice as we need to. That's why we do steps 4 through 9, to get rid of the things that are blocking us. Now that that's done, now that we've had the spiritual experience, now the goal is to actually turn our will in our lives over to the care of God. So what do we mean by our will in our lives? We talked about this, I believe, last week too. Our will, our willpower, whatever we're putting our will towards, that's our thoughts. It's the way we think, right? And our lives is nothing but an accumulation of our actions. So we're going to be turning our thoughts and our actions over to the care of God. And that's going to be kind of what we're looking at in steps 10, 11, and 12. We're actually going to be turning our thoughts and our actions because now we can do that. So if you remember also last week, we talked about after we have this spiritual experience deal here, we got some warnings, and this kind of preempts where we're at right now. Whereas, you start feeling really good, right? We've read in the promises. Life is really, really good. Feels really good. Even Bill, when he had that spiritual experience, man, he was on top of the world, right? And a lot of us have felt that. In AA, it's not in the book. And I don't know if they talk about it now because I haven't gone to conventional AA meetings in quite some time, but they used to talk a lot about a pink cloud. Anybody hear them talk about that? They still talk about that today. You get on this pink cloud, and usually they talk about it happening for like maybe in the first year where everything just feels wonderful. That's what they're talking about. They start feeling really good. Problem is, if you actually have the spiritual experience, it even feels better than what it does in that first year. And the warning they give us right after the spiritual experience on page 85, it says, I'm going to do the first full paragraph, but I'm going to back up. You know what? I'm going to do the last. I'm going to be adding a lot to this. Last paragraph on 84. We covered this last week, but I want to put this into context. Not only do we feel good, the way we feel is covered in the promises, right? We're going to know of new freedom and a new happiness, no matter how far down the scale we've gone. We'll see our experience can benefit others. Things are great. But now concerning alcohol, they don't talk about that, but they talk about it here. After we just got done talking about starting step 10, and it says you will have recovered, the last paragraph tells what that looks like being recovered, having your sanity restored. See, being recovered, the spiritual, it's like two things happen here. You have the spiritual experience by the time you're halfway through step 9, but it goes right hand in hand. When an alcoholic has the spiritual experience, they recover their sanity as well. The insane thinking that precedes the first drink, the alcoholic mind as it's called, it becomes removed. And they don't talk about that in the promises, but they talk about it right here. It says, we've ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol, for by this time, sanity will have returned. Restored to sanity. It will have returned. What do they mean by sanity? We'll seldom be interested in liquor. That's what they mean. If tempted, we're going to recoil from it as if it's a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we find this has happened automatically. We will see that our new attitude towards liquor has been given us without any thought and without any effort on our part. It just comes. That's the miracle of it. We're not fighting it, and we're not avoiding temptation. If you are avoiding temptation, then you probably still have an alcoholic mind. And I would suggest you read page 101 because avoiding temptation does not work. It does not work for us. We feel as though we've been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We haven't even sworn it off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It's been removed. The alcoholic mind, the insanity has been removed. It does not exist for us. We're neither cocky nor are we afraid, and this is our experience. Isn't that great? Isn't that great? There's a promise. None of us have been able to do that. We keep going through this cycle over and over, coming back to A, coming back to A, coming back to A, and not being able to recover. We see it so many times. And this says, if you do this, you get it to happen. Great. Now let's look at that next sentence. This is how we're going to react, so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. There's a caveat there. That means we can go back to the way we were with our thinking. The alcoholic mind can come back. It does not stay permanently removed. And it says we have to stay in fit spiritual condition. We're going to talk about that with steps 10, 11, and 12. And then it says it's easy to let up on the spiritual program of action and rest on our laurels. We are headed for trouble if we do, for alcohol is a subtle foe. We are not cured of alcoholism. What we really have is a daily reprieve. That's why we have a way of living, a daily reprieve that is contingent on the maintenance of the spiritual condition. We have a spiritual experience. We must maintain it and we must grow it. This is done through steps 10, 11, and 12. That's the whole idea here. Tells us on page 20, cover this again, just to reiterate what this book tells us once, tells us many, many times over and over. Top of page 20. Again, if you're recovered, the first full sentence on page 20 says, our very lives as ex-problem drinkers. An ex-problem drinker is somebody who's recovered. Our lives depend. It's dependent upon our constant thought of others and how we might help meet their needs. How about that? Our lives are dependent. Not I'm going to drink it. Our lives are dependent on our constant thought of. Isn't that something you read on page 159 what an AA meeting is? And they say that the way that they described it back in the very early days when there were only 10 or 11 of these guys, they said it's a little gathering of men and women happy in their release and constantly thinking how they can present their discovery to some newcomer. Constantly thinking. Because they knew their lives depended on their constant thought of others, which is what we're reading here. That sounds like working with others is optional. It's kind of starting to rule that out a bit, isn't it? You know, I always thought it was. I do good enough making coffee or maybe lead a meeting, right? Service work, not a thing in this book about that. Nothing. But there sure is a whole lot about working with other people and thinking about them. It says on page 13 as well, and look at where we're at in the book. I mean, working with others is like, this is the last step here. And we're now backing up to page 13 and page 20 in the very beginning of the book. Very beginning, I'm sorry, page 14. Very beginning of the book, they're talking about working with others. They say, for if an alcoholic failed, now this is Bill's story. And this is near the end of Bill having had a spiritual experience. Bill has recovered now. And this is what Bill says is his state as having been recovered. He says, and actually this is confirmed by the 100 that had written it, for if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life, there's that word again, they must perfect it and enlarge their spiritual life. How? Through work and self-sacrifice for others. If they don't do that, he says they could not survive the certain trials and low spots that lie ahead. If he did not work, he would surely drink again, and if he drank, he would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed, and with us it is just like that. Deadly, 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 even being recovered. We can be very, and I'm a prime example of this. That's why I take to this so much, because I'm a prime example of this. Being sober, almost sober, meaning not drunk, almost 16 years and very, very sick. I don't know if I was sicker when I was drinking, honestly, than I was when I was 16 years sober and not being recovered. I mean, at least when I was drinking, I never put a gun to my head. I did that stark raving sober. So miserable. Thought something else was wrong with me. I failed to, I know what they mean that we will not be able to survive the certain trials and low spots that lie ahead if we fail to enlarge and perfect our, I get that. I get that. That is the truth. That is 100% the truth. So we have to do this deal. And we talked about this also on page 15 with Bill, when it says, these all go together, Page 14 is when he had a spiritual experience. Page 15, as soon as he had a spiritual experience, he said his wife, it's right after we just got done reading. If he didn't help if he failed to enlarge and perfect a spiritual life, through work and self-sacrifice for others, he couldn't survive the trials and low spots. The next paragraph says, my wife and I abandoned ourselves with enthusiasm to the idea of helping other alcoholics to a solution to their problem. And I don't know how much time went between Bill having had a spiritual experience to the time right here when he said, you know what? I know I'm not going to survive the certain trials and low spots. So let's hop on a motorcycle and let's go see if we can help some other alcoholics. That's what he decided to do. I don't know how much time was in between there, but it says that they abandoned themselves enthusiastically to the idea of helping other alcoholics to a solution to their problems. He says it was fortunate because my own business associates remained skeptical for a year and a half, during which I found little work. So he had no work. Sounds like it might have been a year and a half when they decided to do that. So a year and a half recovered, hadn't worked with anybody yet. What happened? He says, I was not too well at the time. I thought Bill had a spiritual experience. What do you mean he wasn't too well at the time? He says, I was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment, and this almost drove me to drink. That's what he's talking about. The self-pity, the resentment, all that stuff creeps back in if we're not doing this work. Do we understand that? We understand the importance of that? I think that is highly overlooked in AA. Just my own experience. This is my opinion. This is not in the book. Because I've never heard that so emphasized in AA meetings after being around AA for 40 years. I'd never heard it emphasized as much as I actually see now in this book. I get the big emphasis on being sober and staying sober, but I just don't see the emphasis on working with others. And when I was sober for quite some time, I know a lot of people that were, quote, sober for quite some time that didn't work with other people either. And the way that they were living is questionable. It certainly didn't look like what was going on in these promises. And certainly for me, it wasn't. I mean, this is not optional work. We must do it or die, because if we don't do it, that selfishness comes back and the cycle begins, because that's where it all happens, right? If you don't do the work, they're saying, what's the root cause of our problem? Selfishness. It will come back. Selfishness will come back. And selfishness is where the cycle begins. If you remember the cycle we talked about when we were covering the problem, we start out restless, irritable, and discontent when we're sober as alcoholics. When we're sober, we're miserable. And then we start thinking about the ease and comfort from a few drinks, and we pick it up and we go through this whole cycle. And at the end, we emerge remorseful because something happens. And then we have a firm resolution, oh, I'll never do that again. And now we're sober again. And then we start getting restless, irritable, and discontent. And we start thinking about the sense of ease. And it goes around and around and around. Why are we restless, irritable, and discontent when we're sober? Because of the selfishness and self-centeredness, trying to pull everything in, and we ruin the lives of everybody else, including ourselves in the process. We can't have the selfishness come back. And the only way we know how to do that is to keep in fit spiritual condition, which is steps 10, 11, and 12. Does that make sense? So I want to look at those two things, our will and our lives, as thoughts and actions. So on page 63, this really sums it up for me. I don't know, it's probably 4 or 5 years ago. I really honed in on this one sentence here. The first paragraph on 63, if you go down 3 lines, it says, being all powerful, they're talking about God, because they say he with a capital H. He provided what we needed if we keep close to him and perform his work well. I mean, that really underscores the entire AA program. He's going to provide what we need. What do we need? Well, we do need to stay sober. We do need to be happy, but we can't provide that. We learned we're going to die. If above everything, we must remove the selfishness. We don't have the power to do it. He's going to provide that too. It says he will provide everything we need. We don't have to keep trying to provide for ourselves selfishly. Let go. In fact, it says he will provide everything you need, but there's something you got to do. He's not just going to do it, say, God, give me everything, and then I'm going to be happy. He's not Santa Claus. It doesn't work that way. He will provide what we need, and it says, but what we have to do is keep close to him and perform his work well. We keep close to him, we're going to see in steps 10 and 11. We're asking, what do you want me to do today? We see that. You read page 84 to 88. In fact, when we work, me and my mentor and his mentor and going back, we've always emphasized 2 things. With a newcomer, one is read the doctor's opinion 30 days in a row. If you miss it, start over. If you miss one day, start over, 30 days in a row, because that tells you exactly what's going on with this alcoholic mind and the body. The next thing is page 84 to 88. If you want to live the AA way of life, you need to memorize. You need to memorize. If you're going to go through life, and it says for page 84 for step 10, we're going to be watching for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. I guarantee you're not watching for selfishness, dishonesty, and resentment and fear if you don't know what you're watching for. It's not happening. And if you're not watching for it, you sure in the hell aren't doing the actions you need to do to get rid of it. 1, you don't know what they are. 2, you didn't even know what you were watching for, right? So we have to know it before it can start becoming a working part of the mind. It has to become memorized. And even when it becomes memorized, doesn't mean we're doing it. But it's got to start there. You got to at least know what to do. So that's why we emphasize reading that 30 days in a row. But that's the keeping close to him part. God, what do you want me to do? And then we meditate, meaning we listen and get the inspiration. It says we come to rely on it like a 6th sense. it says. It becomes a sixth sense that we have, and we become to rely on it. Ask what he wants us to do, and then listen to what he tells us to do. That's how we keep close to him. Very, very clear-cut directions on how to do this on page 84 to 88. Okay? The second part, it says, and perform his work well. So I'm asking what he wants me to do. He gives me the message of what he wants me to do. Now I'm to perform his work. And not just perform his work, it says well. Kind of like he provides what we need to the exact extent that we're doing it well. So we're going to have to be the biggest piece of that, aside of whatever other messages you may get, and we could spend a lot of time on that we don't have. But again, read 84 to 88. But the biggest piece of this is leading into step 12 as far as working with other alcoholics, because it says that we can help when nobody else can. That is the biggest piece that we know he wants us to do. He provides what we need. This is what we do. Turn our thoughts, listen to him, ask what he wants us to do, listen to him, and then take action, performing his work well. That's the thoughts and actions piece. In fact, in the doctor's opinion, if you remember, the doctor said well, we can probably go to that real quick, XXV. This is why the doctor's opinion is so important. Dr. Silkworth, when he met with Bill Wilson, this is well before this book was written, before there was any Alcoholics Anonymous whatsoever. You get down to after the first full paragraph, then the letter is there where it says to whom it may concern, drop down third paragraph. And it says in the course of his third treatment, this is Bill's third treatment. And it says at that time, the doctor summarizes 3 things that he saw that Bill and the first 100 did to recover. And he doesn't outline them as steps because the book wasn't written. And these steps of 12 things that they were doing, they didn't even appear until the book was written. Which means when the book was written, there were already 100 recovered alcoholics. They weren't even doing 12 things. When you get time, look at page XVI. That's what they were doing. There were 6 things. They turned into 12. But the doctor saw it as 3. And he says, in the course of his third treatment, this is what Bill did. 1, he acquired certain ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. He learned how to recover. Later in Bill's story, it says he put those ideas into practice immediately and he recovered. That's one of 3 things, is to recover. It's only one. And it says, as part of his rehabilitation, that means there's more to this. Part 2 is he commenced to present these conceptions to other alcoholics, working with others. That's part 2. So 1/3 of it is get me well. Part 2 is help others get well. What's part 3? Impressing on them, that's the others that get well, that they must do likewise with others. 2 of 3 pieces of our recovery process has nothing to do with us. It has to do with others. Constantly working, constantly thinking about others. Again, all the way back to the doctor's opinion. This is before page 1, right? This is in the Roman numerals. They talk about it all throughout this book. That's why I'm saying I'm going to have a hard time getting through all this because there's a lot here. But let's highlight a couple of things. One, if we turn to page 77, again, we're going to be doing a bit of bouncing around here because there's a lot of chapters we're trying to cover here. But I just want to get some of the highlights. Page 77, 3rd line down from the top. So this again, step 9. Think about, we're midway through, or we have started our amends, right? And we started our amends, it says, wait, let's just start at the second sentence at the top. At the moment, think about this as step 9. We're trying to put our lives in order. That's what we're trying to do. Get our lives back together, right? Which it says could take years. But it says this is not an end in itself. So what they're saying is the goal here is not just putting your life in order and becoming recovered. It says our real purpose, and I would underline this, is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people around us. That's going to be our real purpose. That is the purpose of step 10, 11, and 12. Is to fit ourselves to be of maximum purpose to God and those around us. So what we're reading here is that we must do this work, right? Let's even turn real quick to the first page 89. We're going to switch now just looking at step 12. 10 and 11, again, 84 to 88, and it's basically praying and meditating. Study, memorize this stuff. But page 89, this is the beginning of chapter 7, which is called Working with Others. So what do you think that has to do with? Of course, working with others. I always thought that was the only chapter they have on how to work with others, right? But it actually is 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Anybody who's been cycling through this book with us have seen there are so much clear-cut directions in all of these other chapters with working with others as well. But I want to focus on the very first paragraph. Most important thing that they got to say about working with others right up front. It says practical experience. And when they say practical experience, whose experience? It's not just Bill's. This was 100 men and women who wrote this book. This is their experience. Their experience shows that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. Nothing. There's nothing. We just saw that with Bill, right? He started going through these plagues of depression and self-pity. But it later says in the second part of that paragraph that as soon as he came across another alcoholic, whether they got well or not, he was suddenly lifted up. That works. Here it says, nothing is going to assure your immunity from drinking as intensive work. Do not overlook the word intensive. It's defined by Webster's as highly concentrated work with other alcoholics. There's no thing that you can do that's going to ensure your immunity. If you're new, think about that. Because what you're signing up for is not a 1 through 12, I graduate and I'm done. If you want to do that, you can get through 9, which is a lot of hard work. And if you think you're going to move on from there, you're missing what half this book says. And that is that you will, if you're an alcoholic, you will get sick again. And you will either drink and die, or you'll be like me, where drinking wasn't even an option. It was just dying because I was so miserable, and the alcoholic mind had already been removed. I had no desire to drink. I knew that was not an answer, but I didn't know how to live and be happy. That's what happens with us. But here it says nothing is going to ensure immunity from drinking. And really, we know from the cycle, it doesn't even start with drinking, does it? It starts with selfishness. So you can really look at that as saying there's nothing that's going to ensure immunity from selfishness as intensive work with other alcoholics. And that really kind of makes sense because that's the opposite of selfishness. Selfishness is me. The opposite is you. Intensive work with you keeps me from thinking about me, right? There's nothing that works more than that. It's the first message that they wanted to point out here. So with all that, we know this is something we got to do. And they talk about highly concentrated. And it sounds like this is going to be some tough work and we're not going to like it, right? And that may be the case because it tells us later that your phone may jangle. I don't know where they get that. I guess 39, that was a terminology. Your phone may jangle at any time, day or night. You may have to counsel frantic wives. There's some hard things that you may have to deal with that interrupt your life in this highly concentrated work. But while we must do it, I want to look at another thing. If you turn to page 129, no, not 129, 159. 159. And you go down to the second full paragraph where it starts with all this time. I want you to drop down on that paragraph. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines where it says these men. It says these men have found something brand new in life. Okay, now they're starting to work with others. Though they knew they must help other alcoholics if they would remain sober, they learned what we were just talking about. Well, guess what? That motive of just staying sober, that became secondary after a while. It says it was transcended by the happiness they found in giving themselves for others. So while we find we have to do it, after a while, we like it. And you think about it. What can mean more in life than seeing somebody dying of alcoholism? And you can have a hand in because you have learned this information and you can show somebody else how to do it. You can have a hand in through God and actually being a part of seeing somebody's life not only get saved, not only get turned around. I mean, we don't get turned around to where, okay, we're better, but we're like crippled for life. Actually, we come out better than where we started. What could be better than to see a transformation like that happen in front of you? See, rarely do we see that transformation in ourselves. You know, as we recover, it's usually the people around us that see it before we see it. But boy, we can see it with others. What can provide more happiness within your life than to tend to be a part of that? Nothing. So we do it because we like to after we start doing it. We enjoy it. It's transcendent. So the next thing I want to look at here is the whole idea of sponsor versus mentor, because we may have talked about this before, but I do want to highlight it on this series, because sponsor again is one of those words that's used universally in AA. And I ain't gonna argue with it, and I understand the history of where it came from, but I also know it's not in the first portion of this book. And I also know that they tell us that the AA recovery program is only to be found in the first portion of this book. And in learning that, my mentor used to say, you know, actually we're mentors. We teach others that are willing to learn. We teach the spiritual kit of tools. What's in here? We don't teach based on our opinion. We just teach what's in here. That's what we do. And I kind of bucked that a little bit because I heard sponsor for 40 flipping years. I mean, come on, right? So I learned from him that, well, it's kind of, I trusted in so many things that he said because he's led me down the right path for so long. But I took the Reagan approach of trust but verify. I believe you, but let's go to the one thing you taught me to use, which is the dictionary, right? And I looked up the word sponsor one time just to see what it's got to say. Never know. And there's several definitions for sponsor, but the one that seemed to fit the best is it says that it's a person that takes responsibility for another person. I thought, isn't that something? We don't take responsibility for the people we work with. All we do is set the spiritual kit of tools at their feet. We're not responsible whether they pick it up. We're not responsible whether they drink or not. We're not responsible of their communication with God or whether they want to do this work or not. It's all out of our hands. All we do is show them. And it made sense, complete sense. So that's why I continue to use the word mentor. It doesn't use the word mentor in here either. It doesn't really use a whole lot. They talk about a prospect, a couple of other words, but nothing that really fits. So when I look at what we're doing, it tells us over and over and over, all we do is teach what's in this book of how we recovered. This is what we did. This is what we got, right? That's all we do. The only thing that I know has to do with the teaching and learning thing is mentoring. So that's the difference. So the first thing I want to look at, and it's good that we have 5 new people here, almost half the room filled with new people, is if you're looking for a mentor, first off, I'll say it's probably pretty important. And I'll tell you why. You've already read, I've walked you through several sentences in this book. And I would say if you read that sentence on here, you went home and just read the book, you read that paragraph. What percentage would you have gotten out of it versus what I explained to you that it was saying? I know when my mentor read a paragraph and explained it to me for 10 minutes, it was like I didn't get 2% of that out of this, but it makes sense. This is a complicated book. It really is. Having a mentor, it's not that you can't be done without it, but it sure in the heck I've found makes it so much easier. So the first question is, what do you need? I guess I would say, what would be the requirements for mentorship, for a mentor? And one thing I've always heard in AA is I would hear people say, make sure somebody's got at least 5 years. I heard that a lot, or maybe 2 years. Make sure they've been sober for a certain period of time. Well, I've learned this book since then, and I know that that's baloney, but I also know that I had 16 years, and I was in no position to be mentoring anybody when I'm holding a gun to my head, right? Hey, you want what I have? Come along. I have 16 years of misery, and maybe I'll loan you mine. No, sober has nothing to do with it. That's my opinion, but I'm going to tell you the book says nothing about how long someone has to be sober. But what I will tell you, it says on page 18, it gives us directions for mentorship. And if you drop down 1, 2, 3, 4th paragraph, it's a little past halfway down the page, and that whole paragraph is in italics. Not too many paragraphs in this book have the entire paragraph in italics. But once again, they talk about the ex-problem drinker. That is us who have recovered. So the ex-problem drinker, two things, two qualifications to be a mentor. The ex-problem drinker who has, one, found this solution. Well, if you were here last week, what is the solution? To having had a spiritual experience. So if you find somebody you're thinking about being a mentor, find out if he's had a spiritual experience, because that's number one. If he's found the solution, and two, is properly armed with facts about himself. Well, there's lots of facts we just learned today. Like, if I don't help other people, I'm going to die. There's also facts that I know what's wrong with my mind. I also know what's wrong with my body that makes me an alcoholic. I also know that selfishness, self-centeredness is what's going to kill me, not Jack Daniels. There's lots of things to be properly armed with. And if I'm not armed with that, I can't help you with that. So that's the two things it says, properly armed with facts about himself. If the guy's got those two things going on, he's not drinking, he's found the solution, properly armed with facts about himself. By the way, that was not me at 16 years sober, because I had not had a spiritual experience, and I sure in the hell wasn't properly armed with the fact that I needed to get one, right? But it says the person that has that can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in just a few hours. And until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. So you can walk hand in hand with your sponsor for 6 months or a year or whatever. If he doesn't have these two things going on, according to the authors of Alcoholics Anonymous, little or nothing is going to be accomplished. If they're going to sit around, call me every day, go to 90 meetings in 90 days, not directions in this book, not directions here. Not that it's not bad to go to meetings. In fact, you might learn that those are wrong if you go to the right meetings, but they're not directions in here. They need to be able to give us clear-cut directions. That's the point here. The other thing I want to look at is on page 85. It tells us on 85 that we've already read about this. About that vital, it might have the wrong here because I'm not sure exactly where that is, but it tells us that you cannot transmit what you do not have. Right. So if you don't have these things, you haven't had the spiritual experience, you can't transmit that to somebody else. So that kind of reinforces what we just read on page 18. Person has to have had the spiritual experience, and they have to understand how to get it, and they have to be able to explain it to you. That's really, in short, the directions for that. So now I want to look at some clear-cut directions that we find in those last 5 chapters. We're going to try covering 5 chapters in 16 minutes. And this has to do with the directions that they give us. And when they tell us on page 29, get this, page 29, they tell us at the top of the page, first full paragraph says, further on, clear-cut directions are given showing how we recovered. We're going to get some clear-cut directions. And I don't know of any more clear-cut directions than we get than in these last 5 chapters. See what they got to say. And first thing when we start working with somebody, at the top of page 90, says, when you discover a prospect for Alcoholics Anonymous, okay, first thing we do, find out all you can about them. There's a direction. Does anybody know that? That if you start working with somebody, there's actually a direction of what the first thing we're supposed to do? I never knew that. I saw somebody ask me to sponsor them, I'll sponsor them, But there's directions of what to do that they have found to be successful. Rarely has a person failed who has thoroughly followed their path right here. First thing is to find out all you can about him. And it says, if he does not want to stop drinking, don't waste time trying to persuade him. If we're trying to find out all we can about him, the next sentence says, if he doesn't want to stop drinking, does that not indicate that what you want to find out is if he wants to stop drinking? It's the first thing you want to know. Does this guy really want to stop drinking? Or is he here, just see what we're about, not sure, whatever. That's okay. But find out whether he wants to stop drinking, and don't waste time trying to persuade him if he doesn't want it, because it says you may spoil a later opportunity. And it goes on to say, this advice should be given to his family also. Oh, we're talking to the family? Did anybody know when you're working with somebody new, you're supposed to be talking to the family? Has anybody ever had a sponsor that talked to your family members? I never did until I had this happen. Never happened to me. But it goes on to say they should be patient, realizing they're dealing with a sick person. So next thing, if there's any indication he wants to stop, so now if you know he wants to stop, you already found out if he doesn't want to, don't waste time. No, but if he does want to, what's the next thing we do? Have a good talk with the person most interested him, usually his wife. Oh, second thing we do, talk to the person close to him, the wife, the parent, anybody tied by blood or affection to him, whoever's closest to him. Why do we talk to them? You want to get an idea of his behavior, his problems, his background, the seriousness of his condition, and his religious leanings. You're going to need this information to put yourself in his place to see how you would like him to approach you if the tables were turned. Oh, okay. So there's a lot more about this as well that we see through those 5 chapters that have to do, not only do we find this information out, but we also teach them about alcoholism. You guys have been here to hear us say that what these guys have done and what we're supposed to be doing is we also offer our way of living to them, because we learn that our way of living has its advantages for all. For the alcoholic, it's vital. We'll die without it. But it is an advantageous way of living. Is it an advantageous way of living? Yes, advantageous way of living. So that's why we offer it to them. So that means we're also going to need to teach them a bit about alcoholism. They're going to need to know what's going on with the person that's close to him. Why does he drink? Why is it when I tell him I'm going to divorce him if he picks it up again and he does it again? He must simply not love me. I'm getting a divorce. I think it's important for them to know that he doesn't even reflect on the consequences when he picks it up. I think it's important for them to know that. What's wrong with the alcoholic mind? That they're not even in the picture when we pick it up. It's not an excuse, but I challenge you to find another theory that makes sense. Why else would they pick it up? It's exactly why they do. First 4 chapters cover that. We're going to want to teach them that. It tells us on page 111, and I like this because this one's a little more difficult to maybe get across. It says in the first sentence, the first principle of success is that you should never be angry. That's something that we have to teach them. This is the family members. Don't be angry at them. Why? Because we learn that resentment's the number 1 offender. It's going to kill the alcoholic faster than anything. I think we talked about it last week that one of the first things we tell the alcoholic when we're working with them is stay away from resentment. Do not engage in any arguments. If you get it coming at you, if you have to leave, get away from it, because that's what's going to kill you. Well, now we're also telling the family members that too. Even if he's dead wrong, that's what's going to kill him. It's not going to be your fault, but we do know that resentment is what kills us. So somebody needs to explain this. Where else are they going to get that information? It says, page 100. This is all dealing with the family. Today. In the, what do we got? 1 second full paragraph. When working with a man and his family, you should take care not to participate in their quarrels. There's a clear-cut direction. Stay out of it. You may spoil a chance of being helpful if you do, because you're going to end up ticking off one of them, right? And also keep in mind, I can't manage my own life. I have God doing that. Do not rely on me to manage your life. That's not going to work. But urge upon a man's family that he has been a very sick person and should be treated accordingly. That goes back to teaching them about the alcoholic illness. They need to understand that he's sick. He's not just selfish, he's sick. On page 90, we find them telling us, just going through some of these clear-cut directions. Mhm. See, one second paragraph. Sometimes it's wise to wait until he goes on a binge. The family may object to this. So this is talking about with family members. If he doesn't want to stop, what do we tell them? Don't try pushing him and prodding him. All you're going to do is just make it worse. That's been their experience. It says, wait till he goes on a binge. In other words, you're telling them, let him get drunk again. That's going to be a hard thing to get them to accept if you don't explain why. Right? It says, sometimes it's wise to let him go on a binge. The family may object to this, do you think? But unless he is in a dangerous physical condition, it's better to risk it. Now, on our end, do not deal with him when he is very drunk, unless he is ugly and the family needs your help. He calls you very drunk. Oh man, I drank. You should come and talk to me. You know what? Call me, it tells us later, when he has a lucid interval. Call me tomorrow morning when you're hungover and desperate and you emerge remorseful. Call me then. Don't deal with, if we don't know that, we're going to wind up doing what happened to me. I think I was 15 or 16, and my sponsor at that time threw me on the back of his motorcycle and went to see a guy that he'd been working with who got drunk when I was in Michigan. We went to the guy's house. It was probably 11 o'clock at night, and guy's just blasted drunk, puking all over. What do you think got through to him? What do you think? What do you think he even remembered the next day from that? Not a damn thing. What are you going to cushion him up and put him in his bed and make him feel nice and comfortable? We want him to emerge remorseful, right? So that we have to be pretty badly mangled before we commence to solve our problems. We have to be beat into a state of reasonableness. We don't want to cushion it, and we don't want the family to either. You know? So there's some clear-cut directions on that. It goes on to say on page 92, actually, bottom of 91, it says, when he sees you know all about the drinking game. So now you're having a talk with this guy. And this is the only time that we would normally get into talking about our, what do they call it in AA, the drunkalogs, right? Well, this is what happened to me. And oh man, let me tell you, some funny escapade, some tragic escapade, whatever. But the whole idea of that is not to show him, this is the trouble I got into, and this is what makes me an alcoholic. Can you relate? Because I'll tell you, when I was 14 coming to AA, I couldn't relate to any of your escapades. Now, I had my own in the way I felt inside, but it wasn't yours, right? I didn't go through a divorce. I was too young to be married. I wasn't old enough to drive, although I did. But a lot of these things I just simply couldn't relate to. The reason you're going to go into those escapades now is because they can start to relate to some of the escapades, but watch what happens. We're going to turn that to not saying, this is what makes me an alcoholic, because that's not what we're getting out of that. The only point in doing that is so that they know that you understand the drinking game, okay? Then it says, then describe yourself as an alcoholic once he knows that you understand the drinking game. So what do they mean by that, describing yourself as an alcoholic? Or top of page 92, very clear cut. Tell him how baffled you were and how you finally learned that you were sick. How baffled I was. What was I baffled about? The things we're going to tell him we're baffled about, now it's not the escapades. Now it's about, man, and I got in my second DUI and I said, I'll never do it again. And I'm done, man. It's just not worth it. And I drank again. And I don't know why. It makes no sense. I had everything to lose and I drank again. That ever happened to you? That's what happened to me. See, that's what makes me an alcoholic. Why didn't I reflect on the consequences? I probably didn't even think that far, that I wasn't reflecting. Baffling. Why would I do that? And why, if I went out and said I'm only going to have 2 or 3, did I have a lot more than I intended to? Why did that happen? At what point did I change my mind from tonight I'm only going to have 2 to saying, well, it's Friday, I don't have to work tomorrow. Maybe I'll have 25. I mean, that decision making never happened, but that's what happened. Why would that happen? Tell them how baffled you were. Baffling. That's commencing to tell them you being an alcoholic. And then how you finally learn that you are sick. First 4 chapters of this book. Let me tell you why I found out that I end up drinking more than I intend to. Let me tell you about this allergy that I learned that alcoholics have. Let me tell you what's wrong with our mind that makes us pick it up regardless of what the consequences we are. We will pick it up. The time and place will come when we'll drink again. Tell them, you explain that. You better be properly armed with facts about yourself if you're going to do this, right? That's the direction. Give him an account of the struggles you made to stop, tried quitting, couldn't, and then show him about that mental twist that leads to the first drink. That's what we want to focus on, because we learn that that's the crux of the problem. What did I think of when I emerged remorseful 6 months ago, and I said I'm done, and I started going to AA, and I've been sober now 6 months, and then I got drunk. What was the thought that went through my head right before I picked up that first one and said, this is a good idea? What was the thought? It's not like it accidentally fell in my mouth. I made a decision, right? Or did I? We have to show them that mental twist, what happens. Page 24 will show you that. That's another, I'm not going there now, but that is, we learned about that in the first session. Whole paragraphs in italics that tells us what's wrong with their mind. You want to make sure that they understand that. And then it says on page 92 and 93, throughout it, tell them exactly what happened to you. It's on the top of 93, and that's all in italics. Well, we just got done saying he's going to be very curious at the top of 93. He's going to be very curious to know, how did you get well? How did you end up stopping? And let him ask you that question. And if he will, tell him exactly what happened to you. Hey, I got a mentor. He showed me how he got well out of this book. And I had a spiritual experience. And as a result of that, I recovered from this condition. And not only do I not drink, I don't feel anything like I used to. I know exactly how you feel. I was there. I get it. But I don't feel like that today. My life is freaking great today. It really is. And if you're interested, I'll show you what I did. And it says, go on to stress the spiritual feature freely. In other words, tell him that you had a spiritual experience. And as they said, in We Agnostics, that over half of the original membership of 100, over half of them were atheists or agnostic. Don't you think you want to tiptoe around this spiritual experience God thing with them, so you don't antagonize them? It says stress it freely, because here's the deal. It's all we have to offer. We don't have to offer stay sober. That almost killed me. The book will tell you it'll kill you. This is all we have to offer. And we also learn on the top page 48, we talked about last week, the only thing that's going to stop you from moving on to have the spiritual experience is those OSUPs, obstinacy, sensitiveness, and unreasoning prejudice over the idea of God. If you're just so, I don't want to hear about it, then you haven't been beaten to a state of reasonableness yet. And the only thing that can do that is go out and do some more drinking. It's either going to kill you or it'll beat you into a state where you may be reasonably willing to listen to what we have to offer. There's nothing more that we can offer. That's why they're saying stress it freely. So we're going to, at the end of the day, we're going to lay this spiritual kit of tools down, which is the first portion of the book. And remember, if it's not in the first portion of the book, it is not the AA program. And also, I want to look at two more things, page 94. At the top says that's where we outline the program of action for him. It's important for him to realize that your attempt to pass it on plays a vital part in your own recovery. And get this, about midway down the page, it says, this is another important thing you want to stress right from the beginning, is that he placed the welfare of other people ahead of his own. We're already teaching them from the very beginning. Selfishness is the problem. Start thinking about other people as much as you possibly can. Goes down to say the more hopeless he feels, the better. Talked about that. It also goes on to say that if he doesn't want what you have, it says keep in mind that he may have helped you more than you have helped him. And that's what we found if you read through Bill's story. He tried with so many people and none of them got well. And he complained to his wife, Lois, like, I've worked with this many and none of them got well. And she said, well, you have. You haven't drank. It's like, right. And Bill also said, if you remember on page 15, when he worked with somebody new, when he was plagued by those waves of hopelessness and depression, that when he worked with somebody new, he was amazingly uplifted. That is the part of the growth of the spiritual experience. The maintenance and growth continues with that. And I would also state that it tells us that on the bottom of page 95, it says if he thinks he can do the job in some other way, it's when you're dealing with a new guy, or prefers some other spiritual approach, encourage him to follow his conscience. In other words, don't tell him this is the only way, right? It says we have no monopoly on God. We merely have an approach that worked for us. And that, I think, is a very important thing to remember, because I remember doing that myself, saying, well, if you're gonna go back out there, man, you're gonna die. I don't know that. I don't know that. I don't know what's gonna happen. Just like I don't know what's gonna happen if you end up getting a sponsor that doesn't know this book and doesn't teach you what's in it in order to recover. And I'll tell you, the first thing you want to know whether somebody's had a spiritual experience or not, you want to ask somebody to be your sponsor, ask them this. There's one question. Say, hey, you know what? I'm just wondering, are you recovered? And if he says, well, no, I'm a recovering alcoholic, move on. He hasn't recovered yet, right? You go through the process of being recovered through step 9. He either hasn't been there yet or he has no idea what it means to be recovered. If you don't know what it means to be recovered and to know that it's synonymous with having a spiritual experience, he does not have an understanding of the answer that Alcoholics Anonymous has to offer, period. That's a very simple thing to do without being rude to them. You know what I mean? So I think with that, we will end for the day.